John Boyega, angry aliens, and characters people love to hate. We're not talking about The Last Jedi. This is Attack the Block. Attack the Block is a 2011 British action sci-fi comedy written and directed by Joe Cornish. And this is actually his feature film directorial debut. The film score is by Stephen Price, whom you'll know from Fury, Baby Driver, and Gravity. The cinematographer was Tom Townsend, who just did You Were Never Really Here. And the editing is by one of my favorite editors in the film business today, Jonathan Amos. You know him from Baby Driver, Hot Fuzz, and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. The film stars John Boyega, who's one of my favorite younger actors. He's really started to hit it big here in the US finally, most recently with Star Wars and Pacific Rim 2. But my favorite film of his is Imperial Dreams, where he plays a father struggling to take care of his son. The film also co-stars Jodie Whittaker, who you guys will recognize as the new Doctor, but where she really blew my mind was as Beth, the grieving mother on the show Broadchurch, which was fantastic. The film has a really simple premise. It's basically a bunch of bad boyardies who live on the council estates in the UK. They just happen to fight an alien and win, and because of that, a bunch of other aliens invade their block and they have to fight them. So as you guys know, when I talk about movies, I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. That being said, let's start with the good. The first thing you're going to notice is the cinematography. It looks really, really nice. It takes place mostly at night and in and around the council estates, which are like the housing projects in the UK. And even though it takes place just in that one area, they do a really nice job with making places look different in the way that they light them and giving the film kind of a cold and intimidating vibe. Something else I really liked about the cinematography was the really creative shots, the way that they're framed, and the way that they shoot in and around or through things. I also really love the transitions here. There's a lot of good creative transitions. You can tell they really put some thought into them. The film has a very strong opening, not just with the cinematography, but also the acting and what happens in that quick intro. It really gets you sucked into the movie quickly, which is what you want when you're going to see an action film. The music, whether it be the score or the soundtrack itself, really, really works, and it really makes the movie pop a bit more than it would if it had just been like your typical orchestral score. From the start to the finish of this film, John Boyega is awesome. Then again, he always is, but in this one, you could tell that he was going to be a big star. One of the things that tends to be screwed up in a lot of films is planting and payoffs. And what I mean by that is when they show something early on and later on it gets used, or maybe something comes into play to revolve around that object or that place or whatever it is. A lot of movies, they make it so obvious or so annoying, like the stupid doll or whatever in World War Z that counts the time, and you know right away, oh, that's going to get used to count something, and it does. But in this film, quite a few things are planted early on, some of which, yes, I did see coming, and I knew that they were going to get used, but I still appreciated the way it was done. But there were some that I didn't really think about, and when they were used later, I thought about earlier, and I was like, oh man, that was so subtle, that was really good. One of the things that this film does not shy away from is showing the nature of these kids and what they do to survive and how they make money in and around their block. You just think they're kind of punks and that kind of stuff, but I think that's for a reason. One of the things that I really liked about the kids is they show how brave they are and how ready they are to defend and fight for what they believe in. Now, in their case, obviously, that's not always a good thing, but they damn sure were ready to throw down, and they were sticking together while they did it, and I thought that was nice. Now, they don't go into a lot of depth with these characters, but the progression they make throughout the film is nice, and there is something at the beginning where you kind of have a quick glimpse into their home life. It shows you that they're not just thugs, that they actually have families, and maybe they might be doing this for a reason. You can tell that the film didn't have a huge budget, but man, they really stretched that budget well. Now, one thing they don't sugarcoat about the kids is that they are foul-mouthed teenagers, and that's good because that is how kids are. I know that's how I was and still am, basically. There aren't a lot of creature designs in this movie. There's basically two, and one of them is not used very much, but the other one, the main creature that they're fighting throughout the film, the alien, it's designed very well. It's kind of basic, but it really pops, and when it's on screen, it can be pretty intimidating, even though you wouldn't think it by the way it's designed. So I thought it was really creative. Another reason this film worked for me is because I love to see a group of plucky kids like banding together to discover something or fight something or whatever it may be, whether it's It or The Goonies or Cop Car or Stand By Me. This definitely had that kind of vibe, and I really liked the group of kids, like I said, as the film went on. The movie's really good at building tension, whether it be through shot selection, shot length, the way they edited it, the sound design, the music, it all works together really well, which was a nice surprise because it being, a comedy action sci-fi film that revolves around a bunch of gangster kids fighting aliens. I didn't know if there would be any kind of tense moments or sad or introspective moments and stuff, and there are all of those, and the music and all of those shots and everything else work really well to convey those emotions that they're trying to get through to you. It really feels like there's a reason for anything that gets killed in this movie, whether it be, characters or whether it be the aliens or whatever. There's always a reason for it. It's never just like a random thing, and there's no like stupid decisions that were just to progress plot or something, kind of like Train to Busan. Now the Council Estates, the housing projects that they filmed this in, they always make for a great backdrop, whether it be movies like iBoy or Harry Brown or The Misfit Show. But in this, it just had kind of a different feel, and I really liked that. It felt more intimidating. It was nice to see a strong, smart, capable female co-lead in this movie. A lot of times the females in a horror movie or an action sci-fi movie, for most of the film, they are a passive participant. And in this one, she's really smart and she gels really well with a group of boys. And I think that's a nice touch. It's not like a lot of these type of movies, especially involving teenagers, that everything's rosy, all the kids survive, nothing bad happens. There are a few things that happen to them and, you feel really bad when it does. And you really wish this thing didn't happen to this kid because they really grow on you and you really want to see them survive, or you really want to see them not get injured. And I think that speaks to the strength of the narrative and how it was pushed during the film. One thing this film does really well, something that I tend to get annoyed by in a lot of movies, is jump scares, because a lot of them are used like in a cheap way, or it's just their only way that they can do to scare people or whatever. But in this film, they really earn those scares. They build the tension and everything else. Sometimes nothing happens, but sometimes it scares the shit out of you. There were 3 or 4 times where I was sitting on the couch watching this movie and I literally jumped a few inches out of my chair and scared, but then I laughed and I was like, whew, that was a good one. And they are good ones. Yes, John Boyega and Jodie Whittaker were great and they were the highlight of this movie, but I also enjoyed the performances of Alex Ismail and Franz Drama. They were really good. One was really funny. The other one was more kind of like a tough guy. I really liked them, and I liked the way that their characters gelled, and I liked how they were part of the group, and they definitely grew as the film went on. Something else I thought was cool, and that's probably why Edgar Wright produced the film, is it really subverts a lot of the genre tropes and cliches. Every alien movie seems to happen like in a part of the city or in the suburbs where there's a lot of white folk and they're the heroes and all that kind of stuff. Where in this one, the aliens land right in the middle of the estate or the ghetto or whatever you want to call it, and they have a bunch of little badass kids, minorities that they have to deal with. And that's not something you see in a lot of sci-fi or horror action films, and I thought it was a really nice way to tell the story. And that kind of leads me to my next point, which is the fact that this film touches on some pretty deep issues, even though it's a sci-fi action comedy. It goes into poverty and child abandonment and society's outlook on blacks, especially black male youth, and just the youth in general, the way that society looks at them and what they think they're capable of. It even goes into the disparity between the lower, middle, and upper class, the differences in how they're treated during times of crisis or, in normal times, and the way that people look at them. Now, the inspiration for the film I thought was pretty neat. Basically, the writer-director of the film, Joe Cornish, got mugged by a bunch of teenage bad boy yardies. And when it happened, he actually kind of identified with the kids. He saw this fierceness and like a capability, and he wondered what would happen if, say, aliens attacked the neighborhood. What would these kids do? So he traveled all over the country to different group homes and estates and stuff like that. And he asked these kids what they would do if aliens or monsters, attacked their block or their family. What weapons would they use? What kind of tactics would they use? And I think that's pretty great. Something a lot of films really screw up is geography. And what I mean by geography is, shot selection and camera placement and editing of, a location or maybe a battle or a gunfight or whatever it may be. The way that they're shot and the way they're edited, it's kind of confusing and you're trying to figure out who is where and what is what. This film, the geography is made very clear from very early on. So the entire way through the movie, you know where they are, what they're doing, where they're going. And I thought that was neat because as the film goes on, you really feel like you're there with them almost as an observer. The ending was pretty nice too. It was very satisfying. It wasn't what you think would happen, but I think it plays out well and it ends on a high note. Most horror movies these days really screw up the ending. This one didn't. So that's it for the good. Let's talk about the bad. Now, some of this stuff is going to be things that I definitely thought could have been done better with the film, but other things are going to be what maybe other people might have an issue with. Like, for example, the first point is the kids' speech, the way they talk, their accents, the slang. If you don't have British friends, if you're like the typical American and you're not hung around a lot of British people, you are going to be lost. You're definitely going to be putting on those subtitles, and even when you do, you still might be like, what the hell are these kids talking about? Thankfully, I have a bunch of friends from the UK that I've hung out with for years, so I was used to the slang and the accents and all that kind of stuff, but some people are definitely going to struggle. One of the things that a lot of people and critics have said about this movie is the protagonist. The kids are very hard to identify with or very hard to sympathize with, and I can see that to a point. I think it definitely depends on how you grew up and all that. I definitely identified with them because, like I've said before, I kind of grew up in that same situation, so I kind of had an idea of what these kids might be going through and why they're doing it. They're not doing it just to go out and have fun and do it for kicks. But all that aside, a lot of normal viewers are not going to like the kids. No matter how much they evolve during the film, they're still going to look at them kind of like, bad kids, like thugs, like troublemakers. Something that I noticed, and a few people that were watching the film with me noticed, is the audio. I don't know I think it might have been just my copy, my DVD or whatever, but the music was super loud and the dialogue was really low. So I kept having to turn the volume up and down during the film. Now, these being teenagers, some of the jokes are pretty funny, but some of them fall flat and they won't work with everybody. I think a bit more backstory with the kids would have definitely benefited the film, would have helped more people sympathize with them, and would have gave you more insight as to why they do what they do. There is something that happens later in the film that kind of gives you a little perspective on why they're doing what they're doing, and it did work. It had an emotional impact. Now, aside from the aliens, there's kind of this other little side story, and it works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. And the main bad guy in that story, sometimes he seems really tough and cool and badass, but other times he's just really annoying and kind of pointless. So I think that other little subplot, though it helped stretch the length of the film a little bit, it didn't really add too much to it except to give you maybe more perspective into the way that Moses thinks. So in that aspect, I guess it kind of worked, but in a lot of other aspects it didn't. Nick Frost also makes an appearance in this movie. He's usually pretty funny. In this movie, he's okay. His character really could have been played by anybody. The fact that it was played by Nick Frost and it wasn't as good as it could have been because it was him, it was a bit disappointing. There is a sequence later in the film that takes place in this really dark hallway, and the only light that they have are like fireworks. It was one of the best parts of the film, but it could have been much better if they had stuck with the lights staying out and the only lights they have are like fireworks or flares or something of that nature. The fact that the lights were on, it kind of took a lot of the tension away from the scene. If they had kept those lights off for the entire scene, I think it would have added a lot more teeth to it. It would have made it a bit more scary and it would have been a bit more memorable. It's still pretty cool and I've still thought about it, but it would have been something where I was like, man, you really got to check this scene out. If they had done that one thing, and I know they could have because the cinematographer did so many good dark night shots throughout the film. So why they chose to keep like the lights on or whatever for a big chunk of that is kind of a mystery to me. For the most part, the CGI in the film was done really well, but there's one final shot that involves like the bad guy and the aliens and all this kind of stuff. It really looked shit. It kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. It was just done really badly, and it surprised me because for most of the film, it was quality. The CGI was really nice. Now, like I said earlier, the planting and the payoffs and stuff were done really well in this movie, but there was one earlier on that was way too obvious. And it kind of gives away the whole like MO of the way the aliens work and why they do what they do. When this discovery happens later on, it's supposed to be really surprising and oh man, now we can kind of fight them using this. I mean, I knew what that was like in 25 minutes into the film, and that kind of spoiled the ending a little bit. For anybody with a brain, at least, they're going to see that and they're going to be like, oh, I know what's going to happen. Well, I love the fact that they had this really cool group of, mixed minority kids and stuff. Why is the smartest kid in the film, not the most capable, obviously the most capable and stuff is Moses, but there's this other kid, he's like a druggy white kid from like the suburbs. Why is he like the brainiac of the bunch? Why couldn't one of the kids be like the smart kid from the group? You know what I mean? Like, why does it have to be this rich kid from the outside? F that kid. That's honestly all I have to say bad about the film. The film really knew what it was doing, which is really cool given the fact that this was the guy's first feature film. So all that being said, what is the score? Drum roll, please. 7 out of 10.